In late April of 2017, the small city of Ashton, Ohio, settled into its usual rhythm. Life here had always been predictable. Modest suburban houses with trimmed lawns, grocery stores that locals had been visiting for decades, and streets where neighbors recognized one another's faces. On the surface, it was the kind of place where violent crime felt like a story from somewhere else, something that happened far away in bigger cities. But that illusion of safety was about to shatter. It began with silence. 22-year-old Rachel Monroe had always been quick to reply to messages. Her friends described her as the kind of person who would stop whatever she was doing just to check in on someone. She loved long phone calls, late-night conversations about hopes and dreams, and making others laugh when they were down. So when her phone went dark, when calls went unanswered, when texts showed delivered but not read, people noticed almost immediately. At first, her friends gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she had dropped her phone in water, maybe she was just taking a break from social media, or maybe she needed space after yet another exhausting argument with her ex-boyfriend Rahman. But as the hours stretched into days, concern turned into dread. Rachel's family was the first to sense that something was truly wrong. Her sister Christina described the feeling as a pit in the stomach that wouldn't go away. Their parents called everyone they could think of, Rachel's roommates, co-workers, even distant relatives. Nobody had heard from her. The last confirmed sighting of Rachel alive was with Ethan, and that detail alone carried weight. The relationship between Rachel and Ethan had been complicated from the start. To outsiders, it looked like any other young couple. Smiling photos on social media, dinner dates, the usual back and forth of new love. But beneath the surface there was turbulence. Friends whispered about arguments that went on for hours, about breakups followed by reconciliations, about an intensity that felt less like love and more like obsession. Rachel herself had confided that she sometimes felt trapped between wanting to help Ethan and needing to protect herself from him. The silence in April wasn't just unusual, it was alarming. Rachel's background made the contrast even starker. Born and raised in Ashton, she grew up in a stable household, with family dinners every Sunday and holiday traditions that never wavered. She wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She wanted to be a hairstylist, and she was on track to finish her training at a local salon. Her goals were simple: open her own shop one day, settle down, start a family. She told her friends she dreamed of a house with a porch and a yard where her future kids could play. Ethan's life told a different story. His parents had immigrated to the U.S. years earlier, fleeing instability and violence in their homeland. Though America gave them safety, the scars of what they had endured left marks on family life. Arguments were frequent. Tension simmered in the household. Ethan grew up carrying those shadows. As a teenager, he was beaten badly by a group of men during a neighborhood altercation, leaving both physical and psychological scars. By 16, he had dropped out of school and pulled away from most people, isolating himself for hours on end. He knew loss intimately. A close friend of his died in a shooting, and another ended his own life. Each tragedy cut deeper into him, reinforcing the belief that the world would always take away the people he cared about. For someone like Ethan, connection wasn't just desire, it was survival. And when he found Rachel, he clung to her with everything he had, even when she tried to step away. These two lives, shaped by completely different forces, collided in 2016. Their relationship grew quickly, as such relationships often do. At first, there was excitement, laughter, and the feeling of possibility. They seemed inseparable. But in less than a year, the cracks began to show. Rachel valued boundaries, a sense of independence, the ability to breathe in a relationship. Ethan craved closeness, reassurance, and control. Every silence felt like abandonment to him. Every disagreement felt like betrayal. By the start of 2017, Rachel was exhausted. The push and pull, the breakups and reconciliations, the endless cycle of promises and arguments, it had worn her down. She ended the relationship, telling Ethan it was final. But he refused to accept it. He called, he texted, he begged. And when she ignored him, his persistence grew darker, more urgent. That's why, when Rachel's phone went silent in late April, suspicion didn't scatter in every direction. It pointed to one man. For the people closest to her, the silence felt like a countdown. They knew Rachel. They knew her habits. And they knew the danger of underestimating Ethan's desperation. Days earlier, Rachel had confided in a friend that she was worried about what he might do. "He doesn't understand, no," she said. "I just want peace, but he won't let go." Peace never came. What followed was a chain of events that would ripple far beyond Ashton, Ohio. A young woman's decision to end a relationship would collide with a young man's refusal to let go, creating a story that blended obsession, violence, and a desperate attempt to flee justice. The disappearance of Rachel Monroe wasn't just another missing persons case. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would soon span across state lines, make headlines, and leave a family forever broken. In hindsight, those first few days in April, the unanswered calls, the silent phone, the unanswered knocks on her apartment door, were the opening notes of a tragedy. And like many tragedies, the warnings had been there all along. The arguments, the restraining order, the repeated attempts to cut ties, all of them painted a picture. But by the time people realized the full meaning of Rachel's silence, the story had already taken its darkest turn. What happened next would confirm the fears of everyone who had loved her, that sometimes the most dangerous place for a young woman isn't in a dark alley or a distant city, it's inside her own apartment, with someone she once trusted standing just a few feet away. The story of Rachel Monroe's disappearance cannot be told without first understanding the world she inhabited and the people whose lives became entwined with hers. Ashton, Ohio, wasn't the kind of place where one expected headlines of murder or manhunts. Nestled between rolling farmland and the gray ribbon of interstate highways, Ashton was a city that seemed almost suspended in time, big enough to have its own downtown, small enough that strangers often felt familiar. The rhythm of life was marked by football games on Friday nights, church services on Sunday mornings, and community fairs in the summer. It was here, in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, that Rachel built the beginnings of her independent life. She had moved out from her parents' home only a year earlier, excited and nervous about carving her own path. For Rachel, adulthood wasn't about escape, it was about becoming. She wanted to prove she could handle rent, responsibilities, and the balance between work and her ambitions. Every detail of her small apartment reflected her personality. Picture frames on the shelves capturing laughter with her siblings, candles that smelled faintly of vanilla, and walls pinned with magazine clippings of hairstyles she wanted to perfect one day. Rachel was not just another young woman trying to make it on her own, she was someone people gravitated toward. Friends described her as the glue in their circle, the one who remembered birthdays, organized outings, and checked in late at night when someone sounded off in a text. Her laughter, they said, was disarming. It wasn't forced or cautious. It came easily, like water flowing, and it had a way of making others feel lighter. She had a softness to her, but it wasn't weakness, it was empathy. Her dream of becoming a hairstylist was already in motion. She had started an apprenticeship at a local salon, sweeping floors, mixing colors, and slowly learning the craft. It was a job that required patience and people skills, both of which Rachel had in abundance. Clients noticed her calm presence even before she picked up scissors. She had the gift of making people feel comfortable in her chair, as if their stories were safe with her. For Rachel, it wasn't just about hair, it was about connection. But as bright as Rachel's world seemed, there were shadows nearby. One of them was Rahman. Ethan's life couldn't have been more different. His family's journey to America had been marked by hardship. They had fled unrest overseas, seeking safety in the Midwest, but safety didn't erase trauma. Their household carried unspoken burdens, stories of violence, loss, and displacement that rarely left the dinner table. Ethan grew up absorbing that tension, even when he didn't fully understand it. His childhood was punctuated by instability, frequent moves, sudden arguments, and long silences that carried more weight than words. By the time he was a teenager, Ethan had begun drifting. He struggled in school, eventually leaving before graduation. He spent long stretches alone, withdrawing into himself. The streets of Ashton weren't dangerous in the way bigger cities were, but Ethan still found trouble. A beating he suffered in his mid-teens left him scarred, both physically and emotionally. His knuckles carried faint marks from that night, and his mind carried something heavier, the conviction that he was always one moment away from being hurt or abandoned. Ethan experienced loss in a way that hardened him further. When a close friend died in a shooting, the grief deepened his isolation. Another friend's suicide only compounded the feeling that the people he cared about would inevitably slip away. In the absence of guidance, Ethan built a fragile identity around the few relationships he managed to hold onto. When he loved, he clung tightly, too tightly. And when he feared losing that love, the fear manifested as anger, accusations, and a refusal to let go. Rachel and Ethan met in 2016, at a mutual friend's birthday gathering. At first, their connection was disarmingly simple. They discovered they both loved late-night drives with music turned up, that they laughed at the same movies, that they could talk for hours without noticing the time. For Rachel, it felt refreshing to meet someone who seemed to listen so intently. For Ethan, it felt like finally finding an anchor in a world where everything else slipped away. Their relationship escalated quickly, the way many young romances do. Within weeks they were inseparable. Their friends noticed how often they appeared together, at coffee shops, at the gym, walking hand in hand downtown. Rachel introduced him to her family, and for a while things looked promising. But even in those early months there were warning signs. Ethan's need for closeness often tipped into control. If Rachel didn't respond quickly to a text, he'd send another and another, the tone shifting from lighthearted to demanding. If she spent time with friends without him, he questioned her choices, hinting at jealousy. Arguments flared, sometimes over trivial matters. What movie to watch, who she was texting, how she phrased a message. Each time, Rachel tried to smooth things over, believing the storms would pass. Her sister, Christina, noticed. Christina was 2 years older, more cautious by nature, and she had seen enough relationships to know when something felt wrong. "He doesn't seem to respect boundaries," she told Rachel one evening over coffee. Rachel brushed it off, insisting she could handle it. But the unease lingered. Rachel's roommate, Anna Delgado, also sensed tension. She often overheard their arguments through the thin apartment walls, raised voices, long silences, the sound of pacing footsteps. Anna liked Rachel too much to interfere, but she worried that her friend's patience was being stretched too thin. By late 2016 the cracks were obvious. Rachel wanted stability, predictability, and mutual respect. Ethan wanted constant reassurance, constant presence, and constant control. What had begun as romance was shifting into a cycle. Argument, apology, reconciliation, repeat. Rachel started confiding in her friends, admitting she felt drained. "It's like I'm walking on eggshells," she said. And yet, walking away wasn't simple. Ethan's intensity was both suffocating and persuasive. He begged, promised to change, painted vivid pictures of a future together. At times, Rachel believed him, convincing herself that with enough patience, things would get better. But as 2017 began, the cycle reached its breaking point. Rachel ended the relationship for the first time in January, telling Ethan she needed space. But he didn't accept it. He continued calling, showing up at places he knew she'd be, pressing for another chance. In February he wore her down and they briefly reconciled. On Valentine's Day, they even spent time together, trying to reset the relationship with rules and promises. But the same issues resurfaced within weeks and Rachel grew resolute. On April 3rd, she made the decision final. She texted him that she was unhappy, that it wasn't working, and that they were over. It was blunt, clear, and uncompromising. For Rachel, it was an act of reclaiming her life. For Ethan, it was abandonment all over again, and abandonment to him was intolerable. By the spring of 2017, Rachel Monroe was living a life caught between two worlds. The one she envisioned for herself, steady work, laughter with friends, and a sense of independence, and the one she was desperately trying to leave behind. The fracture between these two worlds grew wider with each passing week, and at its center stood Ethan Rahman. Their arguments had begun like sparks, small, irritating, and quickly forgotten. But by the time their relationship reached its final months, those sparks had become wildfires, burning up hours, sometimes entire nights. What started as disagreements over weekend plans or unanswered calls turned into sprawling conversations about loyalty, jealousy, and trust. Rachel wanted boundaries. Ethan wanted complete access. Friends recalled how exhausted she looked after these fights. One evening in March, she arrived at her sister Christina's apartment carrying grocery bags. Christina noticed her shoulders slumped, her smile forced. When she asked what was wrong, Rachel simply replied, "It's always the same fight. He doesn't hear me." Ethan, on the other hand, was convinced their troubles were temporary. He told his few close friends that Rachel was simply adjusting to his background, that cultural differences explained his reactions. He insisted he just needed her to understand him better, to stop pulling away. But to Rachel it wasn't about culture, it was about respect. She needed the freedom to go to work without checking her phone every hour. She needed the ability to spend time with friends without an interrogation afterward. By early April, Rachel felt cornered. She had tried to set rules, tried to explain her needs, but every attempt led back to the same cycle. Ethan apologizing, promising to change, then slipping into the same patterns. On April 3rd, she wrote him a message that was final in tone and unmistakable in meaning. "I can't do this anymore. I don't feel safe and I don't feel happy. Please don't contact me again." That message marked the official end of their relationship, but it also set into motion the most dangerous stage of their story. Ethan's reaction was immediate and emotional. He drove the hour from his home to Ashton, uninvited, and showed up at Rachel's apartment. It was a late evening when he arrived, and Rachel was not alone. Her roommate Anna was there, as well as Anna's boyfriend and a neighbor who had stopped by. Ethan didn't knock politely. He entered through the back, startling everyone inside. The confrontation that followed was chaotic. Voices rose. Rachel retreated upstairs to a neighbor's unit, frightened of what Ethan might do. Anna's boyfriend and the neighbor tried to calm him, standing between him and the rest of the apartment. They spoke firmly but avoided aggression, urging him to leave before things escalated further. Ethan resisted, his emotions running high, until the shouting drew the attention of others in the building. Calls were made to the police. When officers arrived, Ethan was still there. They detained him on the spot. At the station, he was charged with unlawful entry and 2 counts of assault stemming from his altercation with the men inside the apartment. After his interrogation, the court imposed strict conditions. Ethan was forbidden from contacting Rachel in any way, no calls, no texts, no social media, and he was banned from entering Ashton altogether. The order was clear. Its purpose was Rachel's safety. But Ethan didn't comply. In the 2 weeks that followed, he sent Rachel more than 60 messages. At first, the tone was pleading, declarations of love, apologies, promises that he could change. Then came irritation, frustration, and subtle threats. "You're letting other people control you. This is just a rough patch. I can't walk away from the best thing in my life." Most of his messages went unanswered. When Rachel did reply, it was short and cold. "Stop. Leave me alone. Respect the order." But he persisted. He wrote about their arguments as small turbulence, blaming misunderstandings rather than his behavior. He demanded one more meeting, one more chance. He even asked for just a hug for closure. Rachel confided to her sister and roommate that she was overwhelmed by the relentless pressure. She blocked his number more than once, only to find new messages appearing through other accounts. Ethan seemed determined to breach every boundary, every order, every line the court had drawn. It was in this atmosphere of exhaustion and fear that Rachel made a fateful decision. She believed that one final meeting, on her terms with safeguards in place, could end the harassment once and for all. She thought that if Ethan saw her resolve face to face with others nearby, he would finally let go. So she made a plan. The meeting would take place at her apartment. But she would not be alone. Christina agreed to be there, along with Anna and a friend named Emily. Their job wasn't to intervene directly but to stay close, to act as witnesses and to ensure Rachel's safety. They agreed the doors would remain unlocked, Rachel would keep her phone within reach, and the conversation would be time-limited. Every precaution was discussed. Rachel set her conditions clearly when she agreed to see Ethan. No extended one-on-one time, no leaving the apartment, no crossing boundaries. She wanted closure, not reconciliation. The date was set for April 27, 2017. In the days leading up to it, Rachel seemed calmer. Friends noticed a slight relief in her voice, as if she believed this meeting could put an end to the cycle once and for all. She prepared herself, telling Christina, "After this, it'll finally be over." Christina wasn't so sure. She reminded her sister of Ethan's impulsive nature, of the break-in, of the threats hidden in his messages. But Rachel insisted. She wanted her life back, and she thought this was the only way. Ashton, on the surface, went about its usual routines. Families at the park, students preparing for exams, the hum of small-town life. But inside Rachel's apartment, preparations for that evening carried an air of quiet unease. April 27th would not be just another day. It would be the line between before and after. And for those who loved Rachel Monroe, it would be the day their world changed forever. April 27th, 2017. The day that Rachel Monroe hoped would give her closure began like any other spring day in Ashton, Ohio. The air carried the scent of fresh rain from the night before, and the streets were lined with trees showing the first full bloom of the season. For most people, it was an ordinary Thursday. For Rachel, it was the day she believed would finally put an end to months of harassment, arguments, and the suffocating weight of Ethan Rahman's presence in her life. By late afternoon, she was pacing the small apartment she shared with Anna Delgado. Her phone buzzed intermittently with messages from her sister Christina, confirming the plan one last time. Christina had been uneasy about the meeting from the very beginning, but she knew her sister well enough to understand that when Rachel set her mind to something, there was no turning her around. The plan was simple but deliberate. Ethan would be allowed to come by the apartment, under strict conditions. Rachel had laid them out clearly. There would be no private time alone behind closed doors, no leaving the apartment together, and the discussion would be brief. Witnesses would be present at all times. To make sure of this, Rachel had gathered her circle of support, Christina, Anna, and a friend named Emily who had volunteered to stop by for the evening. The four women filled the apartment with a tense energy. Christina arrived first, carrying a small bag and a stern expression. She hugged her sister tightly and whispered, "If anything feels wrong, we end it right there. You don't owe him anything more." Rachel nodded, though her eyes drifted to her phone on the coffee table, the screen glowing with the latest unanswered message from Ethan. Anna tried to lighten the mood, joking as she rummaged through the fridge for sodas, but even her humor fell flat against the heaviness of the evening. Emily showed up soon after, sitting cross-legged on the rug and scrolling through her phone, occasionally looking up as if expecting a knock at the door any minute. Hours passed. The sky turned from golden to deep blue. The street outside grew quieter as neighbors retreated indoors. Inside, every small sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of pipes, felt amplified. By 9 p.m. Ethan still hadn't arrived. Christina muttered that maybe he had decided against coming, maybe the silence itself was the closure Rachel had been hoping for. But Rachel wasn't convinced. She knew Ethan's patterns too well. If he said he would come, eventually. As the night stretched on, fatigue mingled with tension. At around 11:30 p.m., Anna suggested a break. "Let's get out for a few minutes," she said. "We can grab something to eat and clear our heads. He'll text or call if he's actually on his way." Christina hesitated but eventually agreed. The three of them, Anna, Emily, and Christina, headed to a nearby Burger King, leaving Rachel in the apartment. She insisted she'd be fine, that she needed a little quiet before the conversation anyway. For 30 minutes, the apartment sat in silence with only Rachel inside. Around midnight, headlights swept across the parking lot outside. A car pulled into a space and a figure emerged. Ethan had arrived. He knocked lightly at first, then more firmly. Rachel opened the door. Witnesses would later testify that when they left for Burger King, Rachel and Ethan were alone in the apartment. Security footage from the fast food restaurant would place the three women away for half an hour. That window of time would prove critical. Inside the apartment, the conversation began. At first it was calm. Rachel's voice, measured and soft, filled the quiet. Ethan's tone was low, almost rehearsed. He spoke about misunderstandings, about his need for one last chance, about how no one else could understand what they had. Rachel, by all accounts, stayed firm. She reminded him of the restraining order, of the break-in, of the promises that always dissolved into the same patterns. But as the minutes passed, the tension in the room thickened. Ethan's calm exterior began to crack. His words grew sharper, his voice louder. He accused Rachel of listening to others instead of her own heart, of letting her friends and sister poison her against him. Rachel repeated the same word again and again, "No." By 12:30 a.m., the Burger King group returned to the apartment complex. They approached the door, laughing quietly among themselves, their voices carrying through the hallway. When they reached the apartment, the laughter faded. The front door was locked. They knocked. No answer. They called Rachel's phone. No response. Anna pulled out her spare key, but it didn't fit. The lock had been engaged from the inside. For several tense minutes they stood there, knocking louder, calling out Rachel's name. Finally, footsteps shuffled on the other side and the door opened a crack. The room beyond was quiet, too quiet. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. When the women stepped inside, the living room appeared untouched. The soda cans sat on the coffee table, the magazines scattered as they had left them. But down the short hallway, Rachel's bedroom door was ajar. What they saw inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Rachel Monroe was lying on the floor, motionless. Her phone was on the carpet nearby. 2 kitchen knives were scattered within reach. Blood stained the pale rug. Her body bore dozens of wounds, some on her arms and hands, defensive wounds, evidence of a desperate struggle. The women screamed. One of them called 911, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped the phone. Paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. Rachel was pronounced dead at the scene. By the time police officers cleared the apartment, one thing was clear: Rahman was gone. His car was missing from the parking lot. The man Rachel had once trusted enough to invite into her life had vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene of devastation. It was now past 1 a.m. on April 28, 2017. The silence that had once worried Rachel's friends had turned into something far more permanent. And as the first police reports were filed, a manhunt that would stretch across state lines was already beginning. When officers arrived at the apartment complex in Ashton shortly after 1 a.m., the scene they encountered was devastating. Paramedics had already determined there was nothing more they could do for Rachel Monroe. Friends were crying in the hallway, neighbors peering nervously from behind cracked doors, and the entire building was filled with flashing lights and the constant hum of police radios. Amid the chaos, one fact became immediately clear: Rahman was gone. In the parking lot, the empty space where his car had been parked hours earlier stood as silent proof of his flight. Tire marks cut faint lines across the damp asphalt, illuminated by the rotating strobes of patrol cars. Witnesses recalled hearing a vehicle screeching out of the lot not long before police arrived. For investigators, the suspect's identity was already certain. The priority now was to stop him before he vanished completely. Traffic cameras soon picked up his gray sedan heading out of town along Route 71. He didn't drive recklessly. He merged with the thin stream of late-night traffic as if he were just another restless driver on an empty highway. That composure gave him an advantage. The alerts for his vehicle had not yet reached every unit on the road, and for the moment he was invisible in plain sight. By dawn, surveillance footage showed his car crossing into New York State. At the border, no alarms sounded. To the guards on duty, it was just another car rolling south under the glow of streetlights. Back in Ashton, forensic teams scoured the apartment. The evidence piled up quickly: fingerprints, DNA, the placement of the knives, the testimony of the women who had left Rachel alone with Ethan that night. It was more than enough to confirm what everyone already suspected. The question was no longer who had killed Rachel, but how far he could get before law enforcement caught him. Ethan had no intention of making it easy. In a Walmart parking lot in rural Pennsylvania, cameras later captured him stopping to remove the Ohio plates from his car. He replaced them with a different set, their source still unclear. It was a crude attempt to confuse authorities, to buy himself more time. Yet in spite of this effort, he didn't slink off into backroads or hide in remote places. He stuck to major highways, pushing steadily south as though racing against the inevitable spread of his description through police channels. 3 days after Rachel's death, he made a choice that shocked even the investigators who had seen countless fugitives try to evade capture. While on the run, Ethan logged onto the internet and began typing. On Reddit, a lengthy post appeared under his account. The words read like a confession, but not one born of guilt. He presented himself as the victim, claiming Rachel had been the aggressor, that she had grabbed a knife first, that his actions were born of panic and fear. He portrayed himself as misunderstood, insisting their arguments had been blown out of proportion, that her friends had turned her against him. The post was detailed, disturbingly so. It described the knives, the timing of events, and even the moments when Rachel's friends had left for food. Investigators who read it knew instantly this wasn't speculation. These were details only the killer could know. The message spread quickly across the internet. Thousands read it, shared it, and debated it. Some condemned him immediately, calling him a manipulative liar. Others, more disturbingly, engaged with his story, asking questions as if he were just another anonymous user sharing a dramatic tale. Ethan responded to some of them, feeding the conversation, keeping himself present even as police searched for him in the physical world. To the authorities, it was both a headache and a gift. The post confirmed what they already believed, but it also showed how determined Ethan was to control the story. He wasn't satisfied with escape. He wanted to shape how people remembered Rachel and how they judged him. It was a new kind of crime scene, one unfolding on computer screens as much as in living rooms. In the weeks that followed, his digital presence only grew. On Instagram, he posted photos that painted him as both untouchable and broken. One day he mocked the police, bragging that if he truly wanted to disappear he could have done so without leaving a trace. Another day he shared black and white images of himself with captions professing undying love for Rachel, framing himself as a tragic figure rather than a suspect. The contradictions were startling: arrogance mixed with self-pity, bravado with hollow apologies. But all of it had the same effect. It kept him in the public eye, kept his name in headlines, kept Rachel's family reliving their pain. For her loved ones, the posts were unbearable. While they planned a funeral, while they struggled to process her sudden absence, the man accused of killing her was staging a performance for an online audience. He was rewriting her memory in real time, undermining her story with his own version, delivered from behind the safety of a screen. The manhunt expanded quickly. State police, federal agencies, even the U.S. Marshals joined the chase. Every highway camera, every toll booth, every potential lead was examined. His car, his movements, his digital trail, all of it was scrutinized. Investigators believed he was heading for the Mexican border, and every day he remained free, the urgency grew. News outlets ran constant updates. His photo was everywhere. Hashtags demanding justice circulated across platforms. And yet Ethan seemed to thrive on the attention. he posted again, announcing cryptically that he was coming home, that it was time to end this dark chapter. He offered no details, no time, no place, no terms, just vague words that sounded more like theater than truth. But for investigators, even these posts had value. Each image, each background detail, each timestamp was a clue. They studied the reflections in his sunglasses, the shape of furniture behind him, anything that might narrow down his location. The chase was no longer just a pursuit on highways. It was a duel between a fugitive who wanted to control the narrative and law enforcement determined to end it. For all his bravado, Ethan's posts betrayed him, revealing patterns, revealing psychology, revealing the simple truth that no matter how far he ran, he couldn't resist looking back at the audience he had captured. And while the world watched his words, officers in Texas were already closing in. By the time summer arrived in 2017, the story of Ethan Rahman had become a national spectacle. The young man accused of killing Rachel Monroe wasn't just a fugitive. He had turned himself into a character in his own twisted narrative. His words on Reddit, his posts on Instagram, and the taunting tone of his messages kept his name circulating through the media like an echo that wouldn't fade. But every story like his eventually collides with reality. On the night of July 11, 2017, that collision came in San Antonio, Texas. It wasn't the dramatic showdown that television dramas often portray. There were no helicopters overhead, no tense standoff on the side of the road. Instead, it was routine police work that ended his run. A patrol unit had noticed a sedan driving with plates that didn't match registration records. The plates had been flagged earlier in Arkansas as stolen. Officers ran the numbers, confirmed the alert, and decided to pull the vehicle over. When they approached, they found a nervous but compliant driver, Ethan Rahman. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't bolt into the night. He simply followed instructions as though the adrenaline that had carried him across states had finally run out. Inside the car, investigators found items that added to the list of charges. Around $600 in counterfeit bills, mostly in 20s, and evidence linking the vehicle to theft. These discoveries ensured that Ethan couldn't simply be written off as a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was a fugitive, tied not only to Rachel's death in Ohio but also to crimes committed on U.S. soil. Once his identity was confirmed, the machinery of international cooperation shifted into place. American authorities notified their Canadian counterparts within hours. The extradition process would begin, but first Ethan had to face a Texas judge. In the San Antonio courtroom, he looked smaller than the man who had boasted online about outsmarting the world. His defense argued for bail, pointing out that he had no prior convictions in the U.S. and was willing to cooperate. Prosecutors countered with a list that painted a far more dangerous picture. His flight from Ohio immediately after Rachel's death, his illegal border crossing, the use of fake plates, the possession of counterfeit money. They described a man who had already demonstrated a willingness to ignore laws and boundaries. The judge agreed. Bail was denied. The ruling stated plainly that Ethan had proven, through his actions, that he could not be trusted to remain in place if released. He would stay in custody until extradition proceedings were complete. Meanwhile in Ashton the news spread quickly. For Rachel's family the arrest was a bittersweet relief. Their daughter was gone, but at least the man accused of killing her was no longer free. Christina Monroe, Rachel's sister, told reporters, "Now the long part begins. We still have to sit through court, through trials, through all of it. But at least he can't hurt anyone else." It took several months for the extradition process to move forward. Formal dossiers were prepared, evidence files compiled, and every detail scrutinized under the treaty between the United States and Canada. During this time, Ethan remained in a Texas detention facility, his days no longer filled with highways and hiding places but with the monotonous routine of confinement. On January 5, 2018, he was flown under escort back to Ohio, where he was formally charged with second-degree murder in the death of Rachel Monroe. The legal system would now take over. At first, it seemed the trial might proceed quickly. But the reality of modern courts, crowded dockets, procedural arguments, and unexpected crises, meant otherwise. Preliminary hearings stretched on as defense and prosecution debated what evidence would be admissible. There were arguments about Ethan's social media posts, about whether they should be shown to a jury. His defense claimed they were irrelevant, possibly even authored by someone else. Prosecutors insisted they revealed a pattern of manipulation and obsession that went to the heart of his behavior. Then came the pandemic. Like countless other cases across the country, Rachel's trial was delayed. Courtrooms fell silent as restrictions prevented jury trials from moving forward. Hearings were postponed, calendars rewritten, and families forced to wait in limbo. For Rachel's loved ones, the delay was agonizing. Each year that passed felt like reopening the wound, a constant reminder that closure was still out of reach. Finally, in April 2023, 6 years after Rachel's death, the trial began. By then, the evidence file filled boxes: forensic reports, photos, security footage, message logs, witness statements. It was a mountain of documentation, each piece telling part of the story. In court, the defense argued a familiar narrative: self-defense. They claimed that Ethan had confessed to Rachel about seeing other women during breaks in their relationship, and that she had reacted violently. They described a struggle in which she allegedly grabbed a kitchen knife and attacked him. His hand injuries, they said, proved he was defending himself. The multiple stab wounds, they argued, were the result of panic in a confined space, not intent to kill. The prosecution painted a starkly different picture. They pointed to Rachel's text messages, which showed her firm and unwavering intent to end the relationship. They showed the pattern of harassment, the 60 messages, the ignored restraining order, the relentless demands for another chance. They introduced the autopsy report, which listed 47 wounds, 27 of them to the neck alone. They reminded the jury that Rachel had defensive wounds on her hands, that Ethan never called for help, that instead of staying at the scene, he fled across state lines. Witnesses gave powerful testimony. Anna and Christina described the night of April 27, how they left Rachel with Ethan for what they thought would be a brief, safe conversation, only to return to a locked door and a nightmare. Their words carried the weight of guilt, sorrow, and anger. For the jury, they were not just names in a case file, they were living reminders of what had been lost. Perhaps most haunting were the victim impact statements. Rachel's mother stood before the court and described the emptiness of mornings without her daughter, the ache of family dinners with one chair permanently vacant. Christina spoke of waking each day with the knowledge that she couldn't protect her sister, no matter how hard she had tried. Their words silenced the courtroom, even the jurors unable to avoid the emotional gravity. After weeks of testimony, arguments, and deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Ethan Rahman was found guilty of second-degree murder. The decision confirmed that while the killing may not have been premeditated in the strictest legal sense, it was intentional, brutal, and far beyond the bounds of self-defense. The sentence was life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. For Rachel's family, the words "life in prison" brought some measure of relief but not peace. No sentence could bring Rachel back, no prison bars could erase the nights they had lost her to. As her mother told reporters outside the courthouse, "This isn't justice. It's only the least worst outcome." When the gavel finally struck, ending the trial of Ethan Rahman, a silence fell over the courtroom. It wasn't the silence of relief, nor the silence of closure. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a family realizing that no sentence, no verdict, no years behind bars could ever return what had been lost. Outside the courthouse in Ashton, the reporters gathered quickly, microphones pushed forward, cameras whirring. Christina Monroe stood among them, her face pale but composed. She had been Rachel's fiercest advocate throughout the entire process, sitting through every hearing, every delay, every painful photograph entered into evidence. When asked for her thoughts, she said simply, "It's over on paper, but not for us." Her voice cracked slightly as she added, "Justice doesn't bring my sister home." For Rachel's mother, the trial had been a second kind of punishment. Each day in court forced her to relive the nightmare: the photos of the crime scene, the sterile words of the medical examiner, the way lawyers dissected her daughter's final hours as if they were lines in a script. She told a friend afterward that she felt like her grief had been displayed in public, piece by piece, for strangers to analyze. Yet she had spoken when it mattered most, giving a statement that left even the jurors visibly shaken. "Every morning, I wake up and feel her absence before I even open my eyes," she had said. "And every night, I go to bed knowing I will never hear her laughter again." For Anna Delgado, the roommate who had shared so many ordinary moments with Rachel, the aftermath was a cocktail of guilt and sorrow. She replayed the night over and over in her mind: the decision to step out for fast food, the 30 minutes that turned into a lifetime of regret. Friends reassured her that she couldn't have known, that Rachel had made the decision to meet Ethan regardless, but Anna confessed privately that she would always wonder what might have changed if she had stayed behind. Emily, the friend who had joined them that night, carried a similar burden. In interviews later, she admitted she never imagined Ethan would go that far. She had assumed his anger was bluster, that Rachel's firmness would finally put an end to it. Instead, she walked back into an apartment that had become a crime scene. That image, The door locked, the eerie quiet inside, the sight of her friend on the floor, stayed with her, surfacing in nightmares for years after. Ashton itself struggled with the shadow of the crime. For a town that prided itself on community, the story of Rachel Monroe's death cut deep. Neighbors who had once waved casually at one another now looked with suspicion at every unfamiliar face. Parents told their daughters to be careful not only of strangers but of the people they once trusted. The apartment complex where Rachel had lived saw tenants move out within months, unable to live with the memory of what had happened there. Rachel's salon colleagues kept a framed photo of her at the front desk for years, a reminder of the young woman who had dreamed of opening her own shop. Clients who had once laughed with her in the chair now paused at the sight of her picture, remembering the light she carried into every room. One of her mentors said, "She wasn't just going to be good at the job. She was going to be great. She cared about people. That's something you can't teach." For law enforcement, the case became an example taught in training sessions. The danger of ignoring patterns, the escalation of harassment, the risks inherent in allowing contact after restraining orders. Officers spoke of how important it was to recognize the warning signs of obsession disguised as love. The file on Rachel Monroe's case was thick, but what stood out most wasn't the paperwork, it was the timeline. The red flags had been there, step after step, until the final night when it was too late to intervene. Ethan's sentence, life with the possibility of parole after 16 years, meant that in 2033, he could once again stand before a board and ask for freedom. For Rachel's family, that looming date was a cruel reminder that the legal system never truly closes its doors. Christina told a reporter, "We'll be there if that day comes. We'll make sure they hear our voices. He may ask for parole, but he will never deserve it." In prison, Ethan's behavior became a subject of quiet interest. Some described him as withdrawn, spending long hours alone. Others noted he occasionally boasted to fellow inmates about the attention his case had received, as though he still clung to the notoriety he had created online. Psychologists later remarked that men like Ethan often balance between guilt and self-image, struggling to reconcile their actions with the persona they wanted others to believe. But for Rachel's loved ones, those details hardly mattered. Their lives had been divided into before and after, and no psychological profile could bridge that gap. Birthdays passed without her, holidays felt incomplete, and milestones like weddings or graduations carried a shadow. Christina said she sometimes caught herself reaching for her phone to text Rachel, only to remember there would never be a reply. The lingering question that haunted everyone who followed the case was deceptively simple. What truly happened in those final minutes? The prosecution had argued deliberate violence, a man consumed by jealousy and rejection. The defense claimed panic, self-defense gone too far. The jury had found intent, but not premeditation. And yet, the truth, what Rachel said in her last words, what Ethan thought in his last moments with her, remained locked away in his mind. For some, that uncertainty was unbearable. For others, it was irrelevant. Rachel was gone, and the only certainty left was grief. Years later, true crime forums still debated the case. Some dissected Ethan's Reddit posts, pointing out contradictions. Others analyzed the timeline of messages, wondering if intervention could have saved her. But among those who knew Rachel personally, the analysis felt hollow. They remembered her not as a case file or a cautionary tale but as a daughter, a sister, and a friend whose laughter once filled rooms. In Ashton, the seasons continued to turn. The apartment where Rachel had lived was eventually rented to someone new, the stains of that April night scrubbed away, though not forgotten. The Monroe family planted a tree in her memory, a small symbol of life growing where loss had taken root. Each spring when it bloomed, neighbors said it felt like Rachel's presence returned, if only for a moment. And so the story of Rachel Monroe did not end in the courtroom, nor in the prison where Rahman served his sentence. It lived on in the lives of those left behind, in the lessons taught to young women about boundaries and safety, in the quiet reminders of how quickly love can twist into obsession. The legal chapter had closed, but the human story would continue, etched into memory, whispered in caution, and carried in the hearts of all who remembered her. Even now, as the years pass, the question still lingers. Was that night in April the inevitable climax of a relationship poisoned by control and fear, or was it a choice made in one irreversible moment of rage? The law gave its answer. But the truth, in all its painful detail, remains locked away with the only person who knows for sure.